Welcome to The Creative Curtain, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the creative mind. And now your host, Eric Fox.
Welcome to episode number 5 of The Creative Curtain, pulling back that curtain on the creative mind. Do want to remind you once again, if you'd like to support us, we would love to have you on board. We're available on both Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. You know, I have a memory when I was a young kid that really just still sticks in my mind. It must have been like 4 or 5 years old. I remember getting into Grandma's huge tank of a tan Cadillac as she drove down the road and all of a sudden turned into a long private driveway. There were just green meadows all around, trees and grass as far as the eye can see, until we came upon a building in the middle of a grassy field. We went inside. I remember the room was cold. There was a smell that I'd never smelled before, and the wall was lined with what looked like shiny metal doors. As my grandma put down her purse, she pulled out pallets of makeup. And next thing I know, she's putting makeup on a corpse. Excavating this memory from my childhood really made me ponder the fact that I really have never spoken about this. I was just being watched by my grandma as she went about her normal everyday job task as a beautician. While I was thinking about this, I considered how taboo the topic can be, or even just make people squeamish. Today's guest is working to demystify the inevitable conclusion of that human experience and to ease the stigma of talking about death. Louise Hung is the writer and producer of the popular Ask A Mortician series. She's a member of the Order of the Good Death, as well as host of the Death in the Afternoon podcast. Louise Hung steps behind the creative curtain.
This is The Creative Curtain.
Louise Hung, I really appreciate you stepping behind the creative curtain. How are you doing today?
I'm well. I'm happy to be behind the curtain. See what's going on there.
Well, we pulled the curtain back just like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. So we like to see what goes on behind the things in which we experience, explore, and just watch, listen to, and all the other things. So I really appreciate that and really appreciate you taking some time today.
I'm excited to be here.
All good stories, like we say here in the Creative Curtain, have a beginning, a middle, and we don't use the end here, which we may a little bit today. It might be a little different on this one, but more of the future, and that's what we want to talk about today. So, Louise, let's go and start at the beginning. Where did life begin for you? Where were you born or raised?
Well, born is one thing, raised is all over the place. So I was born in Hong Kong. My family has lived in Hong Kong forever, basically, generations. And then when I was a kid, we moved to Seattle, Washington, where I spent 12 years of my life happily living with big extended family, my grandmother, my mother's family, my parents. And that was a wonderful place to grow up. I still have a lot of warm feelings for Seattle. And then we moved to Dallas, Texas. Culture shock there. And I spent my high school years in Dallas, some middle school and then high school in Dallas. And then I went to Missouri for undergrad, Los Angeles for grad school. I went to St. Louis University, Missouri. Go Billikens. And then I went to the University of California at Los Angeles for my graduate degree, which is in directing for the theater. There, I learned about storytelling. I learned about putting together productions. I learned about writing. And a lot of my focus there people are surprised by this, was in puppetry. I was a big puppet person for a long time, and big movement person, sound person for a long time. And I actually directed in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles theater scene for a while. I taught theater for a while. And then, there's going to be a lot of and thens and thens and thens. Then my husband and I moved to Honolulu, Hawaii, where I still directed, but I left teaching and began really focusing on my writing career. And that is where this was in like the heyday of like all those online publications that were specifically like, and there was a niche for everyone. And so this was like the heyday of like personal essay writing. And so I got a regular writing gig, writing for a publication called XO Jane, which many people may remember with some very rosy thoughts, or as like, oh, that one. And it was a lot of things. There were some really wonderful writers there, and there were some scandals. But it was like an amazing crash course in like how to be a woman on the internet and how to get your words out there in a timely, thoughtful manner and always with honesty. And I learned so much. It was like going to grad school again.
There's a lot to unpack there because you've had quite a journey, different experiences, culture shocks from Hong Kong to Seattle to Dallas. Your family growing up, it was a very extended family. Did you have creative types in that family that maybe you latched onto or found them to be inspiring to you and maybe got you heading down the direction you decided to go to?
Yeah, I'm lucky that I come from a very creative family. That isn't always the immigrant experience. That isn't often immigrants don't have the privilege to pursue creative things all the time. And while my parents couldn't follow their like creative passions, they encouraged us to do that in any way we could. So I was allowed to take audition for plays in school. I was allowed to enter writing contests. I was allowed to major in theater in undergrad, which so many people in my family were just like, okay, so you're just going to be poor forever. Okay. Or you're just like not going to have a real job forever. Like you're just going to be mooching off the family forever. Gotcha. But we were lucky. I'm not the only creative in my family. I have an older half sibling who went on to be an actor and a singer and a producer rather successfully in New York City, Broadway, stuff like that. I got a lot of support from many people in my family, extended family as well, to pursue something creative, but also do it in a thoughtful way that it's not just like, I'm going to make a statue and no one will pay me. And that's great. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like if you are happy and capable and able to make a statue that no one ever sees, but it makes you so happy and you never see a cent from it, like I applaud you.
Right.
That wasn't what I wanted to do. So
you want to be able to pay the bills a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to be able to pay the bills, and my family was like, okay, yeah, like you do have to pay bills. So,
right.
There were, yes. So that to answer your question, there are creative people in my family, and those who couldn't be creative supported my creative pursuits, with the caveat that like, if you're going to do this, you're going to really do this. This can't be like, today I'm a painter, tomorrow I'm a dancer, today I'm an actor, tomorrow, it's gotta, you gotta put your work in.
Gotta have progression.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Perfect. So it took you through a lot of different environments. Was there any place surprising, maybe as you were growing up, that you found nuggets of inspiration? I mean, going to Dallas, going to Honolulu, obviously, there's different things in which you can take from each. Was there anything surprising as you were growing up in which, like, really maybe helped your creative endeavor that maybe people on the general with the cliche of places, because everyone has the cliche of places?
Yeah, it's true. I think that a lot of my things that inspire me, especially now, have filtered down from early experiences in those sort of culture shock situations, because I've gone from places where everybody looked like me to nobody looks like me to people actively dislike me for the way I look, my family is, to places where, like, after we lived in Hawaii, we moved to Japan, to Yokohama, and then we moved back to Hong Kong for a little while, and then we moved to a different place in Japan called Yamaguchi. So what sort of filtered down through all that from elementary school, middle school, et cetera, to adulthood, is that when in those situations where I feel like a fish out of water, two sort of ways of moving forward become abundantly clear. And I think they're both valuable. One is to lean in, like, I am who I am, and that is not going to change. And that isn't like you gotta accommodate me, because that that doesn't work in a foreign country. But like lean into who I am and be like, okay, these are the things about myself that I can't break on, I can't bend. And how can I use these strengths in myself to navigate this new, oftentimes very intimidating place that may not speak my language. And so I guess retaining who I am and using that as a way to retain confidence in a new place is very helpful, because it also can be absolutely terrifying. When I first moved to Japan, I didn't speak any Japanese. It happened all very quickly, and I got there. I'm like, I look like people thought I was Japanese. I don't think I look Japanese, but people mistook me for Japanese, so they speak Japanese to me. It was absolutely horrifying for me to not be able to communicate at all. So I would try and retain my composure. But then the other side of it is to just be humble, just like open yourself up to it and be like, I know nothing. I'm willing to show you a little bit of my, I don't want to say fear, but my trepidation. And if I'm willing to show that, a little more like unsure side of myself in this give and take here, are you willing to help me? Are you willing to extend a hand, an olive branch, whatever it may be? And I've found that being vulnerable in those situations is so powerful. I mean, of course, there are going to be there are a lot of politics involved in this world, and I accept that and I respect that. But there are so many people who, if you are just willing to say, I don't know, I don't understand, can you help me? And their demeanor changes from like, why weren't you listening to me, to, oh, okay, let's see how we can help each other.
Random question that kind of pops in my head when you're talking about this experience. Instead of the verbal, you had to use your body. You had to do the nonverbals. Do you think maybe that led you into the interest with puppetry? Because puppetry, you got to have the big motions. You got to present yourself. I mean, the mouth can only go like this. It can't make the moves that our lips make. Do you think maybe that led you to puppetry and something that really spoke to you?
Yeah, I have always, even as a kid, had a fascination with, and I couldn't put it to these words, but the fascination with communication and how we communicate, because maybe it comes from the fact that I grew up bilingual. I grew up watching my parents sometimes struggle with the nuances of English, and I had a sort of obsession with how we can communicate without this. So maybe, I mean, maybe that has something to do with, certainly with puppetry and the communication of, a shoulder lift or a head tilt, or, with puppetry, with certain types of puppets, just a shake, just like shaking the puppet can communicate, fear or excitement, or now it's speaking and it doesn't even matter what it's saying, but it's shaking at you. So, I think throughout all the incarnations of the things I've done, it's always been grounded in how is the best way we can communicate a story.
I think that's such a perfect answer and so intriguing like that. So writing is kind of where you started putting your hats. I mean, you're wearing so many hats, constantly putting one on top of the other, but the hat you wanted on top was writing, which you did with Exo Jane, but it also has continued. So where have you gone since Exo Jane, since that was kind of where you started getting your footing as you went along as a writer?
Exo Jane, I did that for, I want to say, almost 4.5 years, 4 years. And as I was doing that, I was also actively doing the gigs, freelancing, writing for at one point, on the regular, 8 to 10 different publications at a time, and just churning it out, which I couldn't do now. I think that I was much younger, and I was totally okay with just nose to the grindstone and just type all day long. And that was my life for a long time. And the great part is because I could travel everywhere and still get a paycheck everywhere I was going, as long as I had an internet connection. I was also doing some like social media management, copywriting here and there, paying the bills. And then in, I want to say I think it was 2017, end of 2016, Exojane went under. And I was suddenly without my main thing, the thing that not only like put me out into like people sort of knew who I was, it also, I felt like adrift, like, oh shoot, I have a very specific voice in this world. Like I wrote specifically about death and folklore and grief and mourning myths and stuff like that. And it, amongst other things I wrote, it was very well accepted at Exojane. I had a column there. It was, people knew me as Louise from Creepy Corner. And then it was gone. And surprisingly, it's really hard to pitch, like, do you want a death column? And maybe now it would be different. I wonder now if I were to like if I were like 10 years younger and I went to a major publication, was like, hey, I'd like to write a column that's all about death and how culture handles that. They'd be like, yeah, I think that maybe would be more acceptable. I don't know, maybe my worldview is a little skewed.
Could very well be.
But, so anyway, so that happened, and I was like sending out all of these feelers to anyone I knew in the publishing world because I wanted to keep writing. Do you have a need for these skills? I can write about other things. Like I also wrote, and I still try to at length, about the Chinese American API experience. And I just wasn't getting a whole lot because this is also when there was like this major shift in essay writing for mass consumption. It's just changing. Mm-hmm. And my friend Caitlin Doty, reached out and was like, hey, you need a job. I need a writer. And it just sort of went from there. Yeah, it's perfect. And I totally didn't expect it. I mean, we've been friends for years, but she'd gone off in her direction and I'd gone off on mine. And sometimes I like interviewed her or we chatted, or she actually came to Japan when I was there and we hung out. It just never occurred to me that they had, quite frankly, that they wanted or could bring on a writer. And so, yeah, I went to work for the Order of the Good Death while I was still overseas.
For people who maybe don't know about the Order of the Good Death, can you kind of fill in a little bit of what that is?
Yeah. The Order of the Good Death is a nonprofit organization that endeavors to pull back the curtain on death and the death conversation and normalize the conversations that culture and societies have about grief, death, funeral costs, the choices we have when we die, and that talking about death is not bad. It is not terribly morbid, and it's something that ought to be like squirreled away. Like, quite the contrary. It must be spoken about, especially in times like these. It has to be spoken about because we have a lot of decisions to make before we die. So the Order, in a nutshell, through education, through resources, through just honest conversation, endeavors to make death a part of our life.
As the classic term, there's only two certainties in life, and some people don't do that other one, but everyone does the death part. So removing that stigma and that stymie. I think back when I started this episode talking about my story when I was a little kid. I mean, if it wasn't such a taboo topic, maybe I would have been able to express it more, come to terms with it more, understand it more. So I love that aspect. So Order to the Good Death has many facets from what I'm understanding. We're talking a podcast, we're talking YouTube series. You are a writer for Ask A Mortician, writer and producer. So what is that process like? Because that's a collaborative environment, because Caitlin has her experiences, you have yours. How do you guys come together with those different experiences to create what we see on YouTube?
Well, I think it's a surprisingly long process. A lot of people, especially YouTube culture, which whatever that is these days, you see like 21-year-olds who are like putting out videos like 3, 4, 5 times a week, and you think, oh yeah, it's easy. You just, you do your makeup, you get in front of the camera, you blah, 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 you edit, put out the video. Maybe some people do it that way, and it's very fast and they do everything. We treat it more like we're creating a little production every time. And maybe that comes from my production background. Caitlin has a production background. We are thoughtful, methodical, careful people. So how that makes our videos. So the nitty-gritty of it is that the inception of a video to release date is usually, on average, I want to say between 2 and 3 months. Which saying that out loud for me is like, wow, that seems fast. Others are like, what? I mean, we've gone like when I make our production calendar. I mean, I've gone 6-8 months ahead of time. So sometimes people will be like, oh, could you like work up a video for September? And I'm like, no, September's already done. We're looking at December. So typically, what will happen is like there'll be the nugget of inspiration. Caitlin will email me or call me and be like, hey, what do you think of this? Or I'll, do the same, be like, hey, I came across this thing, or how come we haven't done a video on this? And we'll go back and forth on that. There's a lot of weird texts in the middle of the night being like, Mary Shelley? Just question mark. And then when one of those sticks, and we have lots of like running lists of, things we want to do in the future, things we want to do on location. It's just, there are lists and schedules and spreadsheets everywhere. Once we land on a topic, we then decide, Caitlin and I will decide what the angle will be, because we don't just want to do like a book report on like aquamation or like, I'm trying to think of something that's just like very popular, but we have to have our angle on it. Like it can't just be like, here's saponification, here's what happens when your body turns to soap into the water. Beginning, middle, end, by. Like, we have to find something that's compelling to us.
So it's not a regurgitation, it's complete rebuild in your own style, your own words.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a complete rebuild, but it is finding something that we hope that you wouldn't have thought of and has a greater impact on the death world. So we'll come to like a rough idea of like the questions we want to ask in that story. And then I will go away and I will write, typically, like sometimes Caitlin will do the first write, but I'd say most of the time it's me. I'll go away, I'll have, X amount of time to research and write a script. We work pretty much entirely off script now. And I will do the first draft of that script and I will send that version to Caitlin, who will then go in and, depending on what I need from her, like sometimes I'll put in little parts like, I need the Caitlin to say stuff here. Like they're just like from her. The Caitlin, the character of the Caitlin to talk about her thoughts, because I've gotten pretty good at writing as the Caitlin, but I need the actual genuine Caitlin sometimes to get in there. And so she'll go through, maybe she'll add some things, she'll take some things out, it comes back to me. I go through once more, making sure that there's not like some weird like statistic in there or just something that doesn't land or doesn't make sense. And then from there, I prepare it for production, for shooting, which goes into her teleprompter, but we have a specific way we like the thing to go in the teleprompter for our editor. So then it goes back to her, and I'm in New York and she's in LA, and I'm rarely on set at the same time with her, but I feel like I am a lot. And she shoots the video, does her thing, and then does the
Caitlin?
the Caitlin, yeah. The mortician, she and her camera person will upload the footage, and our editor, who we've worked with for years and years now, he is as much a part of like the soul of Ask A Mortician as Caitlin is. Like a lot of that visual language is his creation. So hats off to Landis Blair. And he'll start working on the footage. A lot of times, I'd say a quarter of the way through his work, he'll get in touch with me and be like, hey, there's some beats here that are not landing for me. There's some, it's very long right here. Can we talk? So I'd say most of the time, Landis and I will then get together and start talking through like sections and beats and what can be cut and what needs voiceover, what needs some zhuzhing, you know. That's one of my most favorite parts of the process. It's like, I love the writing, but it feels very like, you know, I'm just in my writing bubble and I feel very like, sometimes I feel a little bonkers, just like, oh, me, the words, the death. But then I get to collaborate like via like Zoom or whatever with Landis.
It's very orchestral, isn't it? You have all these different, you have the violin, you have the oboe, you have that, and all coming together, like you were saying, finding your beats, finding your flow, finding your rhythm. Where sometimes, you know, you see sheet music, but once you start putting that orchestration together, it creates a new creation all around, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is so satisfying to see something I write go from this to the page and thinking like, oh yeah, this is what I think it's going to look like. That's what it's going to be. And then see what Landis and Caitlin take it to, and then the actual recording of it. It's just like, okay, that is not what I envisioned. It's like the nugget of what I envisioned, but it went so much further, and it's just so satisfying. We recently did a video about the bubonic plague in San Francisco in the 1900s. And it was like a topic that I was kind of obsessed with. I was like, can we please do this video? I'm obsessed with the bubonic plague in San Francisco. But I wrote this bonkers script that was way too long and had way too many like moving parts and details. And Caitlin, you know, put her hands on it, and you know, she was able to sculpt it a little bit more, and then I sculpted a little bit more. And then it went to Landis, and he's like, it needs something, like the beats need to be clarified. There's stuff like something's off. And so he and I on multiple times we sat down and like literally went in with like fine tooth, and we're like, okay, cut that line, take that 2 lines, move it up here. Oh, and if we do that, it's like creating another little puzzle. And now I'm incredibly proud of it. Like, it has these little old-timey silent movie title cards. It has footage that is just, it's perfect. There's like newspaper from the era, you know, spliced in there. And it just went so much further than I thought it would. And a lot of it was the joy of tinkering with someone I really trust. Like, tinkering with somebody who, like, we have a shorthand, and I can just say like, maybe just go in with a big knife there. And he's like, got it. You know? So that's really satisfying.
That's awesome when it all comes together, because, you know, in a team collaborative environment, being able to find that where, just like Caitlin, we found you guys found the other person that also were able to link those fingers and really make that almost a non-verbal. Once again, we're going back to the non-verbals, where you're able to non-verbalize, but still be able to communicate in a way. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, it's really, when it really comes together and it is so much better than any of us had envisioned, it's just like, chef's kiss. That happens, you know, we get the video in good shape, we all like sign off on it, and then it gets uploaded to YouTube. I do all the prep on, you know, description, shout outs, making sure, you know, citations are there. And then I release, and then I just sort of monitor everything for a while, make sure that, you know, there's nobody like getting into the comments who's horrible, unfortunately. Gotcha. And then, just disseminating it throughout our various platforms.
And then you're on to that next one already that's been built up for 9 months.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we rarely have a time where it's like, we don't have anything in the shoot. Like, there's always something that's like in some incarnation. So
let's talk about the current. I mean, we talked a lot about the current, but I do want to hit this up because the topic obviously became a lot more on the forefront. To a lot of people, we talk about 2020 as what changes they had to make. I think maybe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, 2020 actually probably brought some more spotlight to you a little bit, because it is a topic in which some people are maybe approaching more, or actually, how did 2020, instead of me assuming, how did 2020 affect you guys in your process?
It was an evolution. It's interesting because this is not, I'm not saying this is what you were saying, but some people, you know, erroneously said at the beginning of 2020, like, oh, you must be loving this. It's like, oh, absolutely not. Like,
No.
I cannot tell you how much we were not loving it. When things really got bad, I was in New York City, which, as we all know, was not fun. Caitlin was stuck in Texas. Like, literally, things got bad as she was in the middle of like a country, like cross-country road trip, and she just had to stop in Texas and hunker down in a friend's thankfully empty house and stay there for a few months. It was very difficult. And so along with like our lives being very strange suddenly, we felt a real responsibility to put out information that was correct, that wasn't fear-mongering, which a lot of it was. Like, I'm sure you saw like, oh, they're burying bodies on an island in New York. How dare they? It's like, no, okay, this has been going on. This is not a bad thing. This is actually a good thing. This isn't a new thing. Anyway, so we felt a lot of pressure early on to release smart, thoughtful, truthful information. It also changed a lot of our plans for the year. We had a lot of location plans, which we just could not do. We couldn't do them safely. We couldn't do them responsibly. And we also, it's like, there's this line where like, even if you can go to a beautiful place in the middle of the Ozarks or whatever, you shouldn't. And you shouldn't be portraying yourself as doing that, because, you know, people look to you and we do not want people being like, well, you know, the mortician did it, so how bad could it be? Or call us hypocrites or something. So yeah, it really changed the way we thought about how we can both continue to expand and improve our channel, but also be responsible. And so what happened was we tried to do a little bit of serious, like we released a series of videos talking very candidly about death and COVID. Like, what about refrigeration trucks? Are they good? Are they bad? They're good. What's it like handling or working with families, handling the bodies of their COVID dead, stuff like that. A lot of stuff on what are your rights as somebody who isn't, you know, necessarily a cisgender person during all this, like how to protect yourself. And then we also realized that this is also a channel that people come to laugh a little bit. I mean, we educate, but sometimes we try and educate in our own sort of like campy, weird way. And so we didn't want to just become the serious COVID death channel. Like that can't sustain. So we decided, yes, we are still going to do our secret porpoise, the monk buried story. That it's one of my favorite stories we worked on in 2020. It was just a silly story about why monks were burying these porpoise in an island, and why or an archaeological find where they're these ancient babies who were found wearing the skulls of other babies. And, you know, like these are interesting and they were timely, but they were also like, okay, we can still have a little bit of fun and people need that right now. So we try to strike that balance, and we're continuing to try and strike that balance. Now, that being said, 2021 really just was like is a gut punch to Los Angeles right now. And I'm sure as many people have seen from the recent video we released, Caitlin's funeral home and all funeral homes in Los Angeles are struggling. It's hard. There are more bodies than they can deal with. There's more death that they are capable of dealing with right now, and that they are in the desperate situation of having to turn people away at funeral homes. And it is dire and it is hard, and that is something that we decided to make a video about because it was getting underplayed. So we had a responsibility to talk about it.
I'm letting this digest a little bit. There was a lot there. I love that. Obviously, we talked 2021, which is where we are currently. And like we do on here, we had the beginning, we had the middle. Let's talk about the future because we don't talk about, well, I guess we'll talk a little bit about the end. This episode will be a little different, but I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So let's talk about the future. What is the rest of 2021 and what are you looking towards as you continue your creative journey?
Well, as far as Ask a Mortician goes, it's it's hard to say because we don't know what the year is going to bring us. But we take pride in the fact that we're very good at adapting. We are very good at rolling with the punches, and we are very good at seeing need and if it is appropriate for us to respond to that need. There have been times that people have been like, oh, you should say something about this medical thing or this social thing, or just people have requested that we talk about things that we feel are outside of our lane, and we don't need to be in all the lanes. So I think that we are... You're not the first person to ask me this. Like, where's the channel going? I'm like, right now, I'm thinking about our videos in April, and I'm thinking about, the video that is coming up this month. For me, that's moment by moment. It could change. Something could, I don't want it to, but something big could happen, and then we react and we see where we fit into that narrative. I mean, ideally, I would love if we could go on some of those big location shoots that we've been piling up. Like, there are so many places that I would love to be shooting. I can't say where they are, but there's so many places that I'm just dying to get that research going and write the script and get that shot. But we cannot think that far ahead right now. So we do what we can do and hope that it is, again, educational, thoughtful, entertaining, and enlightening.
And obviously you want to keep writing for your future. Beyond this project, maybe there are other projects that are kind of on your mindset. Is there anything in which you're wanting to do, maybe explore personally as you continue into the future?
Yeah, trying to think how much I can say. I continue to write my own things and my own work. I continue to speak occasionally. I just did a talk a little bit ago about decolonizing ghost stories in America and how that ties up with how people who are immigrants approach death and the death stories and death rituals that make up immigrant American life. So a big part of my storytelling has to do with how death and tradition and immigrant life all tie up together. And I'm working on a project that has to do with that.
Interesting.
I can't say too much about it, but I hope that I will be able to later this year. It's just vague casting. But yeah, so ghosts and death and grief, oh my.
Well, I would love to have you on later on in the year once again when you're able to pull back the curtain on more things. So I would love that if you're available for that. For anyone who would like to connect with all the stuff you are doing currently and can connect with you, how can they do that?
I would say, well, you can follow me at Louise Hung 1 on Twitter. I'm like a dinosaur who isn't on Instagram. So
we won't know what you're having for dinner tonight. What will we do?
I know. Eventually, I'll get on Instagram someday, like when I'm like 80, and then I'll die. Sorry. You can also look us up at the orderofthegooddeath.com. That's orderofthegooddeath.com. And you can also look us up at Order Good Death on Instagram. And you can also look us up on Twitter, Order Good Death, at Order Good Death. And then our YouTube station, hello. Our YouTube station is Ask A Mortician /Caitlin Doty. And that is the bulk of my work. And that is pretty much the sort of video education arm of the Order of the Good Death. So, that's us.
Louise Hung, I really appreciate you taking some time. I've been just intrigued. I've been going through your channels for a while now, and I love the fact in which you were able to spend some time and join us and talk about that process, pull back that curtain, of course. And, we're all trying to find nuggets of our own creativity, and there's always nuggets you can find for someone else. And I can speak for myself. I've definitely pulled some nuggets myself today, and hopefully everyone listening has had a chance to as well. Thank you so much, Louise.
Thank you. This was fun.
This is The Creative Curtain.
Such a fascinating discussion, and really had a great time talking to Louise Hung. We really appreciate her opening up about how she goes about demystifying and making things comfortable with an uncomfortable topic. Next time on The Creative Curtain, we talk with Matt Pick, an LA actor and musician who's a huge star in Japan. We explore how the differences in culture can spur creativity and the methods that Matt uses to bridge between the two worlds. Matt Pick is our guest next time on The Creative Curtain.
This has been The Creative Curtain with Eric Fox. If you have any questions, comments, or would like to be considered to be interviewed, email contact@thecreativecurtain.com.